Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. It has been a while. For the new people, I am Anita Christina, and I am just a country girl from North Carolina, and I enjoy connecting, chatting, and creating. And so on this channel, we're going to talk a whole lot about a little bit, and so I'm hoping that you'll come in, have a seat, and chat with me. I'm going to do this in multiple parts just so that it doesn't get too long, and you can just kind of fast forward to the part that's important to you. I am doing this because when I got ready to get the surgery done, number one, in my area, it wasn't a surgery that was done extremely frequently. Typically, people chose to get knee replacements. And so, because I was a bit young for a knee replacement and I'm pretty active, the OATs procedure was recommended. I'd also done the research around kind of the micro fracture surgery as an option. But when we talked about it, the OATs procedure made more sense using my own cartilage. So just to let you know, this is not medical advice. This is just sharing with you my experience, that if you're looking for someone who wanted to talk about their experience and their journey, that, maybe you'll land here and something that I say can be and share in my journey, can be helpful. So a little bit about what happened. So what happened? I started having trouble in my knee in January of this year, during January of 2026. And I didn't really know what was going on because I'm pretty active. So I was thinking maybe it was my meniscus because it was kind of toward like the inner part of my knee there. And so I was not like, oh my God, like this is going to be my meniscus. I'm going to have that surgery. And so I really did a lot of like wrapping and icing and all the things. And so those methods weren't really working. So eventually when I went to the doctor, they were just like, the orthopedic doctor was like, yeah, this sounds like meniscus, and the insurance company recommended I go do PT. And I'm sitting there thinking like, why would I do PT if you don't know what this is? Let's do an MRI. But they were like, no, you got to do PT several times. Well, eventually I got done fighting with them and I ended up getting an MRI to find out that we had been doing PT for a meniscus, and my meniscus was fine. It was not that. It was a bone contusion, and I had a pothole in my cartilage. And so when I began to think about like, how could I have done that? Like Zumba's intense, but it's not that intense. Well, ultimately, it slipped my mind that earlier in the season, I had actually fallen on some concrete steps and landed on my right knee. I'd actually smashed my watch, but I'd forgotten about it. And so because I'd forgotten about it, and it was like back in October the year before, and I hadn't had any problems really between October and later in November. And then it just kind of got exponentially worse after November. So I think because there wasn't any immediate effect, I disassociated the two. So anyway, so when we figured out that's what it was like the only way that that's really going to get better, in order for you to have an active lifestyle that you want to have, you're going to have to do some surgery. Otherwise, this is going to continue to be something that's going to be debilitating for you and get worse down the road. And so that's what brought me to getting the surgery. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll get the surgery. We talked a little bit about how long I would be out of commission, and I had already really had to take a break from the gym for about 2 months anyway. So I'm like, okay, well, I've already been down for 2 months, so being down for 2 more months won't be that big of a deal. It was a bigger deal than I anticipated, and I was not prepared for it at all. So that's a part of this discussion too, is to talk a little bit about how I wish I would have prepared for my surgery and what I actually did before my surgery. Okay, so my surgery was scheduled for April 30th. I knew that I was going to need some support afterwards, but it was really just kind of like, hey, you'll be around on crutches, that type of thing. I had been walking on crutches earlier just because due to the lack of support in the knee. So I was pretty familiar with getting around on crutches. It didn't seem like it was going to be a big problem. So I just said, hey, based on the fact that I'm probably going to need some meds and have somebody to help, I had arranged for someone to come for about 4 or 5 days after my surgery to be here. So that was what I had arranged for. So I had support the first 4 or 5 days, which was paramount. Unfortunately, that was not enough. I should have had more. The first 5 days were kind of the worst of it, but additional support would have made things recovery so much better. I could have focused more on my recovery. So what does support look like? So support looks like having someone who can help prepare your meals, or even if you've done some meal prep ahead of time, warming that up and having that ready for you. Someone who can keep track of when you take your medications, because if you're taking them pretty consistently on a 4 to 6 hour window, you think that you'll remember, but you won't remember. So you'll have to have someone who can do that. And I even tried to cheat the system a little bit and try and track it with like Alexa, but I found that she actually was very reluctant to keep a medicine log for me. So I would have to nickname things for my medicine. So like I would call my narcotics like M&Ms, or I would call my ibuprofen Tic Tacs, or I call my muscle relaxers like Starburst, and just say, hey, I had a Starburst at this time. So it would keep the medicine log. So now she's always ordering, like, she always wants me to add candy to my cart. So that's a little, that's kind of funny. But anyway, so yeah, so you need someone to keep up with that for you, because that's very hard doing during like the early times. The other piece of it is making sure you have ice. So a lifesaver for me was the ice machine, and I'll put like a link below, or maybe a picture in the caption to show you what that looks like. But basically it's like this container that you fill with ice and water. You plug it in, and it has this apparatus that'll wrap around your knee, and it'll just kind of pump cool water to the knee as long as the water in the reservoir stays cold. So the goal is really making sure the reservoir stays cold with ice, or either you can kind of cheat and do frozen water bottles and then fill it with water around that, so that it's a little bit easier to manage. So when I did not have support, it was a little bit easier to be able to go and get like the frozen water bottles, as opposed to having to continue to like put ice in the bag and all that kind of stuff, and fill the reservoir. So those are like some of the really big things that are important for meds, food, and ice. The other thing that I didn't consider before my surgery was like the layout of where I stay. I stay in a 2-story townhouse. Bad idea. I thought that kind of once I got to the top level that I'd be fine, but once I got up here, while I had support, it was fine. But when my support left, it really put me in a bind trying to get up and down the stairs. And my thought was like, oh, I'll just crawl, I'll kind of scoop like a baby, down the stairs. I did not account for the fact that I was going to come home with a locked brace, right? And so when this brace is in the full and locked position, it is just straight ahead of you. And so trying to go down a set of steps with your legs straight ahead of you, unsupported with a deactivated thigh muscle, it is very, very difficult. And I did not understand that or anticipate the difficult nature of that. So there were many days that there were lots of tears, because I had to keep going down the stairs to get ice, or to get food, or do any of those things, or try and get down with one crutch. It was just very difficult. So the layout of a 2-story housing was not ideal at all, and is something that I would have done differently in retrospect. So I want to keep this video fairly short. So we'll talk about a couple more things. So the layout, figuring out where you're going to sleep and how you're going to be comfortable. So are you going to have like a recliner? Are you going to lay in the bed? Like, what is your setup going to look like? Because really those first few days, there's probably not going to be a lot of movement. It's really going to be more about staying comfortable, having pain management, making sure you have food with your medicines, and really being close to a bathroom to get through the day. So the last thing we'll talk about in this segment is bathroom management. So the first day, that was another thing I was not expecting. I was just expecting, hey, I'll be on crutches, I can get to the bathroom. That proved very, very difficult. It was not anything that my surgeon gave me a heads up about, because he's a male, so he wasn't really thinking from this perspective. But when you think about it, if you have a leg that's straight out and you have to go to the bathroom on crutches, and then depending on where your commode is situated, like, is there room for you to have a leg that's straight out? Because naturally that's not how we use the bathroom. So is there enough room for that? Do you have to sit straight? Do you have to sit sideways? Once that leg is straight out, something has to be supporting that. So if you don't have a person person holding that leg or something that can be propped up, that is very uncomfortable, and that is a ton of pressure on your knee because your thigh is not activated in those early days. So there's no way that can be held up unless you're like holding on. Like I had to like hold on to the strap of my leg while I'm sitting on the toilet, like, balancing on the good leg. It was very, very tough. So eventually there were a couple of times where I just didn't make it on time. And so the last thing you need is to have accidents. You still can't get the leg wet yet. It would just be a nightmare. So ultimately by day 2, we settled on these. Me and my kids call them lady diapers, and they were a lifesaver. And I would say, to my friends out there, I have no shame in realizing that that's what assisted me in when there were times in the middle of the night. There were times where, again, you're drinking a lot of water, you're taking in fluids, and you just cannot get to the bathroom fast enough. If you're a woman, you're having to take your undergarments and get it over this really bulky leg brace. Sometimes you just need some help until, you get more into the rhythm of it, or you actually have a little bit more dexterity. So that was something that we figured out on day 2, but had I known more about that, I would have prepared earlier for that. And then the last thing before my surgery, and I did do this part right, was I did have conversations and in-depth conversations with my doctor about pain management. Everybody may not be able to identify with this, but I know that sometimes as Black women in healthcare, we are not given the same considerations in terms of pain. It can be assumed that we do not feel pain the same way, and that a lot of providers that are not fair and equitable will not provide adequate pain medication. So we end up in a lot of pain, and I know that firsthand from C-sections. I've known it from spinal surgeries, where I have literally had to beg providers to give me something to relieve the pain, and have been treated as though I was an addict, as opposed to, it is perfectly fair and reasonable that if someone has had, spinal surgery, that they, within that first week or 2, should have access to pain medication. So because I'd had several terrible experiences in that way, I have had pain medication withheld from me, even though I am not an addict. I have never had any issues of that sort. Because I know that shows up, that was something that I addressed immediately with my physician to make sure that will be taken care of, because I could not proceed, or I would not proceed with the surgery if that was going to be the case. I just felt like that would be way too traumatic. So that was something that, if you feel like pain management has been an issue for you, or maybe an issue, is having an open dialogue and conversation around that, so that's one less thing that you have to go in with concerns or worries about. All right, so that's part 1 of the OATs procedure in terms of before your surgery. So those are some of the things that I thought about, some of the things that I did think about, some things that I wish I had thought about before going in. So stay tuned to part 2, where we will talk a little bit more about day of surgery through day 5, what it was like, and just sharing what I expected and maybe what surprised me.